Welcome to Tiny Show and Tell Us, the bonus series where you write in with your favorite science news or factoid, we read your email aloud, and then we dive deeper. I'm Sam Jones, and I'm here with my co-host, Deboki Chakravarti.
Hi, Sam. Last time we did this, we talked about stale lung air, and we talked about von Willebrand's disease. And a reminder for all of you listeners that if you have a story you'd like for us to cover on Tiny Show and Tell Us, all you have to do is write us an email at tinymatters@acs.org or fill out the form linked in the episode description. Sam, you can go first.
All right, would love to. Okay, so my Tiny Show and Tell Us story is from listener Josie. And Josie wrote in saying, have you heard about the Plankton Manifesto? I recently wrote a paper on this and I found it so interesting. This came out January 2024 and it calls for the need to protect plankton for their essential services to the base of the food webs, their ability to sequester carbon, and their untapped potential for medicine, plastic replacement, and more. I didn't realize that plankton are not one species, but a classification for small organisms that cannot move on their own, so they're moved by ocean waves or even wind through the air. They can be microscopic or huge. And then Josie puts in parentheses, jellyfish are large plankton. There are already a lot of places that plankton have been used today, like a species of plankton was used to create one of the COVID vaccines. Ooh. I'm excited to see what we will learn about plankton in the future. I hope you enjoy this and want to learn more. Thank you, Josie. This is really fun. Okay, so I want to talk about plankton for a sec before we get into the Plankton Manifesto. So planktos or planktos is Greek for to drift. That's very fitting. And like Josie mentioned, plankton cross a lot of different types of life. So, you have bacteria, archaea, fungi, viruses. Plankton are really important. They're primary producers. So that means that they're making a lot of the oxygen that we are breathing. We've talked about algae being really important for oxygen production. Some species of algae are considered plankton. Plankton also shape a lot of our planet. They fix a lot of nitrogen in the ocean. They also fix a lot of carbon, something like 30 to 50 billion metric tons of it a year, which is amazing because it means it's not getting into our atmosphere, which is what we want. We've got enough carbon in our atmosphere. Plankton can cause massive blooms, right? Like you can see blooms of plankton from space because they can span thousands of square kilometers on the ocean's surface. They're important for food webs. They're a part of the water cycle. I could go on and on. But also, there's a lot of important things to know about plankton. But I think that the thing that feels relevant leading into the Plankton Manifesto is that we affect plankton. We mess up the physics of the ocean by mixing water around. We change up the temperatures. I think a lot of times when we think about things that we do to the ocean, we think about acidification, right? Like we are changing the chemistry of our oceans. We are introducing a whole lot of pollutants, leading to these oxygen depleted areas. So the Plankton Manifesto, it was started by the Ocean Stewardship Coalition of UN Global Compact. It was inspired, apparently, Deboki, you found by the Seaweed Manifesto, which I also didn't know was a thing and I think is amazing. And so this manifesto, it's a collaboration between people from different spheres. You have people who are in academia, business, international agencies. And I thought it would actually be interesting for me to read a little bit of the introduction because I thought it was well written and gives you an idea of why this should exist or why the people who created it think it should exist. So in the introduction, whoever it is writes, despite their exceptional biodiversity and the critical roles they play in the global ecosystem, plankton remain almost entirely absent from ongoing international discussions related to the blue economy, blue food, blue carbon, national biodiversity strategies, and COPs. Few plankton-related global programs are led by leading public agencies, research programs, and international NGOs, as the focus in aquatic sciences is typically placed on visible and more traditionally deemed, quote, charismatic organisms, such as mammals, fish, corals, and more recently, seaweed, or to health concerns related to waterborne pathogens. This lack of consideration of plankton may in part be due to significant knowledge gaps, limited market applications, and the complexity of planktonic ecosystems. The Plankton Manifesto outlines how a more comprehensive understanding of these organisms contributes to developing strategies to tackle the triple planetary crises of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. And it continues from there. I didn't want to add too much, but I thought it was really interesting that they are like, we know these are not, quote, charismatic organisms.
Yeah.
However, I loved the call out to that.
No one's out here finding plankton.
Yeah, I know. I feel like when I think of Plankton, I think of SpongeBob SquarePants, and like Plankton's not very nice.
Yeah.
You know, he's kind of a jerk. So that's not great PR. We need to work on that.
That's why they wrote this.
Yeah. They're like, we are really upset by Nickelodeon's treatment of Plankton.
Yeah.
Yeah. So part of the manifesto is this like understanding that we can use Plankton for a lot of things. For example, in monitoring the health of ecosystems, in inspiring the design of new materials, and serving as a source of new drug molecules that might be able to treat different conditions. And so the manifesto overall, it's geared toward helping people understand these aspects of plankton. And it also calls for a push toward more education and awareness around these organisms. So it's very cool.
Yeah.
And now I need to go check out the Seaweed Manifesto.
Yeah. We're just going to become the Manifesto podcast.
Yeah.
Can I tell you my favorite fact I learned about plankton while I was reading the Plankton Manifesto?
Yeah.
Yeah, so apparently the reason that they're involved in the water cycle is because some of the species will produce these sulfur compounds that get into the upper atmosphere, and those sulfur compounds form like the little nuclei that you need to form clouds.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah, I had no idea that like plankton are out here contributing to cloud formation.
Okay. Yeah, then that makes sense. Their role in the water cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
I just thought that was wild. Like sitting here like being like, yeah, plankton are cool. We should appreciate them. And like now I'm going to look at a cloud and being like, a plankton made you.
Thank you, Plankton. This Guy Sucked is a history podcast for haters by haters. Join historian Dr. Claire Aubin and a new expert every week to pull back the scholarly curtain on some of the world's biggest bummers. No dead person is safe. And the show's guests prove that the best part of understanding the past is criticizing it. From Charlemagne to Carl Schmitt, every episode gives listeners all the ammo they need to win dinner table arguments over why history's main characters were actually kind of the worst. New episodes every Thursday. Subscribe to This Guy Sucked in your podcast app now. That's This Guy Sucked from the Multitude Podcast Collective.
Okay, well, Sam, I have a letter from listener Mayank, who writes, my name is Mayank Puri. I'm a chemistry professor in Oklahoma City and a big fan of Tiny Matters. Thanks for all that you do. Thank you, Mayank.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to submit a couple of things for the Tiny Show and Tell Us, both related to being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis a few years ago. So I'm going to do the first one, Mayank, and I'll briefly allude to like your second one. But here's the first story that Mayank sent us. The diagnosis for my MS in particular can be pretty drawn out, involving lots of blood tests, a spinal tap, and a number of MRI scans of the brain and spine. My coping mechanism during this time was to focus on things that make me happy, with chemistry being high on that list. Due to my graduate studies in chemistry, I would often prepare and run NMR samples to help determine the chemical structure of molecules that I was trying to make in the lab. As I was lying down for my first MRI, I realized that the tables had turned, and it was I who was sitting in a giant NMR tube, as MRI and NMR are essentially the same analytical technique, but on two very different sample sizes, small tube of liquid versus the human body. Then my second message was about contrast agents, but I wanted to focus on this part of the story because I had never thought about how similar NMR and MRI were. And the fact that they are, yes, kind of basically the same thing. So for listeners, NMR stands for nuclear magnetic resonance and MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging. So yes, they both use giant magnets and radio waves to like excite protons. And so what they're doing is they're measuring the energy that's released by a proton as it goes back down from its excited state. And with NMR, you can use that information to draw all these conclusions about like what other things that proton is bound to. And with MRI, the machine will basically take in that information to visualize different parts of the body, like your brain, your blood vessels. We've talked about functional MRIs where you're looking at blood flow in the brain.
Right.
So it's an incredible technique that's been used for a lot of things. We've also talked about some of the limitations of MRI, but obviously, it's incredibly valuable. And it's valuable in cases like where Mayank is trying to get this diagnosis.
Right.
So I was really curious about how we got from NMR to MRI. And so basically what I found was NMR was discovered in the 1940s. It was discovered independently by two physicists, Felix Bloch and Edward Purcell. And what they had found is that when some nuclei are put in a magnetic field, they could absorb and emit energy. This discovery was so important, they got the Nobel Prize in Physics for this in 1952. And this led to chemists developing NMR, and people were realizing, the value of NMR for a lot of chemistry tools. In the 1970s, a doctor named Dr. Raymond Damadian, I'm not sure quite how to pronounce his name. He was one of the first to suggest that maybe we could use NMR to actually find cancer tissues. And in 1971, he published a paper showing that NMR could actually do this. It could distinguish between normal and cancerous tissue. And so over the 1970s, more scientists and doctors figured out techniques that would actually lead to the development of the MRI scanner. One of those professors was someone named Professor Lauterbur, who was at Stony Brook University. And apparently at Stony Brook, one of the first living organisms to be imaged, I think, with the MRI were aquatic snails that were living on the campus.
Oh.
Yeah. And so what I found is that they did, at least at some point, and maybe still do, have some of his equipment on display in their graduate chemistry building. If you're at Stony Brook and you can tell me if this is true, I want to know. I also found out that in 2011, the American Chemical Society designated the chemistry department at Stony Brook as a National Historic Chemistry Landmark because of Lauterbur's work.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to just how important this technique was.
Yeah.
So in 1977, Dr. Damadian and his colleagues did the first full body MRI scan of a human, which was incredible, again, because it opens up this ability to do non-invasive imaging of people. And I found this New York Times article from 2011 that was kind of going back into the archives to see how the New York Times had reported on MRI. And so what they had found is in the early 1980s, patients were starting to get scanned with these machines, but they were also a little bit freaked out that the word nuclear was in the name of NMR because they thought that meant there was nuclear radiation involved. So by the mid-80s, most doctors had started calling the technique magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. And there's an article from March 17th, 1985 in the New York Times where that was the first time that this newspaper in particular actually officially started using MRI to describe the procedure. So I thought that was really interesting that they could trace that.
Yeah, actually, it makes me think, I was just going to say, because in 1979, you have 3 Mile Island, which is a nuclear meltdown.
Right.
And then you have Chernobyl in 1986.
Right.
And so I'm just thinking about the time of that. I mean, it's interesting.
When people might have been more aware of nuclear radiation, been more scared of it.
Right. I mean, I guess if MRI was officially used by the New York Times, so the first time in 1985, that was a year before Chernobyl. But anyways, I was just
yeah,
interesting. When did people become afraid of that term?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, this is what 3 Mile Island is near Pennsylvania, right? Technically Pennsylvania. It was Pennsylvania. Yeah. I mean, neither of us was alive at the time, but yeah, I'm just thinking that was probably maybe fresh in people's minds. Oh, that's so interesting. I love those kinds of things. Thank you, Mayank, for writing in and sharing your story and this realization that you had while in an MRI. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. Mayank's other story was also about realizing that the contrast agents that are used in MRI scans and some of the techniques used there were related to things they'd done in their PhD, which I also just thought was a really interesting connection. I imagine going through this process must have been really scary and stressful.
Exhausting.
I don't know. Yeah. There's something about finding the thing that you worked on in this process. I just imagine it must have been very trippy, but also it seems like it really stuck with you. And so thanks for sharing that with us as well.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you were able to, in these times of, as you mentioned, you had to get a spinal tap and all this and, made a note about how painful it was. you're a true scientist going, you know, like kind of returning to the science even throughout this process. And I think sometimes when we're going through like really stressful, frustrating, upsetting, uncomfortable, whatever it may be times, like for those of us who really love science, I feel like understanding the science behind something or drawing a science connection sometimes makes us feel, for different people, it does different things. But like for me, sometimes it brings this like sense of understanding and control of a situation.
Right.
Even if I don't really have control of it, like there's something about it that like it allows my mind to fixate on something else.
Right.
Because oftentimes the things I'm fixating on are things that I can't change or do that much about. And so like, what's the point? And so being able to fixate on something really interesting and cool and maybe like a flashback to your PhD
right.
or the work that you do in a lab all the time, like is just an interesting and valuable thing to be able to do.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's like something about the familiarity of it that I feel like you can sometimes like appreciate in those kinds of moments.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you to Josie and Mayank for submitting to Tiny Show and Tell Us, a bonus series from Tiny Matters created by the American Chemical Society and produced by Multitude.
You can send us an email to be featured in a future Tiny Show and Tell Us episode at tinymatters@acs.org, or you can fill out the form that's linked in the episode description. We'll see you next time.